Ethan Ward thought his daughter adored him until one night he overheard the truth. Clara and her husband were secretly plotting to place him in a care home and sell his seaside house for their own gain. Heartbroken but far from helpless, Ethan devised a plan that would turn their betrayal into their downfall. While they dreamed of wealth, he sold the house in secret, secured the money, and prepared a devastating surprise. When they returned, their keys no longer worked, and what they found waiting inside shook their world to pieces. This is a story of betrayal, revenge, and a father who refused to be discarded. If you enjoy stories like this, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let us step into the misty shores of Hollow Pines and uncover how Ethan's plan unfolded. The wind rolled in from the sea with a steady rhythm, carrying the scent of salt and damp wood, rattling the shutters of Ethan Ward's home on the edge of Hollow Pines. The house had been built high above the cliffs, a fortress against storms, but after Margaret passed away, it had become less a home and more a museum of a vanished life. The furniture was polished, the curtains washed, the windows clear of dust, but the silence inside pressed down like a weight. Only the low hum of the old refrigerator and the creak of wood in the shifting night kept Ethan company. He was a man who had once lived for the sea, a shipbuilder who understood the ways of timber and tide, but now he spent his evenings in a worn chair facing the ocean, as if the restless water might whisper back the voice he had lost. Margaret's photograph stood on the mantel, her eyes bright with the laughter that had filled the house for decades. Ethan often found himself speaking to her when no one else was around, recounting small things like the neighbor's dog digging in the garden or the way the gulls fought over scraps near the pier. Her absence was a constant presence, a hollow that nothing could fill. His daughter Clara called when she remembered her voice, sweet and light, but always distracted, always rushed. She lived inland now with her husband Victor, far from the sea, and the smell of ship paint her life filled with conferences, dinner parties, and the endless pursuit of comfort that Margaret had once warned could hollow out a soul. That evening the phone rang just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The light from the last of the day cast the water in streaks of silver and gold, and Ethan rose slowly from his chair to answer. Clara's voice sang through the line, warm as ever. "Dad, how are you?" she asked, as if distance could be covered with sweetness. Ethan smiled in spite of himself. He told her he had eaten dinner, though he did not mention that it had been nothing more than reheated stew from 3 nights ago. He told her he was doing fine, though he did not mention that the mornings had grown harder, the hours heavier, and sometimes he forgot why he had walked into a room. Clara responded with questions, gently scolding him for not using the grocery delivery app she had shown him, reminding him that he should take better care of himself. Ethan chuckled, deflecting with ease. He had been a shipbuilder all his life, and old men who had weathered storms did not admit to weakness. Their conversation carried the familiar rhythm of love wrapped in distance. Clara told him about the business retreat she and Victor were attending in the city, about the investors they were meeting, about the opportunities that seemed always just beyond reach. She laughed, but it was a laugh edged with tension, the kind of laugh that hid more than it revealed. Ethan, though he said nothing, heard the strain. He had spent his life listening to the sea, to creaks in wood and whispers in rope, and he knew when something was unsound. Still, he let it go, not wishing to pry. She told him she loved him before they ended the call, and he held on to those words for a long time after the line went silent. The night deepened. The house, though familiar, felt cavernous, each shadow a reminder of what was gone. Ethan sat in his chair again, his hands folded across his lap, staring at Margaret's photograph. He remembered the long years they had built together, the sacrifices, the dreams, the laughter. The house was not just timber and stone. It was the vessel of their life, every board nailed with purpose, every wall painted with care. Clara had been raised here, had taken her first steps across the wide planks of the living room floor, had run down the hallways, giggling with ribbons in her hair. This house held it all, and Ethan guarded it like a captain guarding the last ship of his fleet. But beneath that calm evening lay currents of unease. Ethan did not yet know it, but this was the last night he would feel the comfort of routine without suspicion. Soon the tide would shift, and the man who had given everything for family would come to face the most painful truth of all. It began innocently. After the call ended, Ethan lingered by the phone, his thoughts drifting. He reached for Margaret's old recipe box, intending to distract himself with memories of meals they had shared when he noticed something strange. The line had not clicked off. There was still the faintest hum, the sound of distance. He pressed the receiver back to his ear, curious, and that was when he heard it. Clara's voice again, but not the Clara he had just spoken to, not the Clara of warmth and concern. This voice was sharper, calculating, stripped of tenderness. She was speaking to Victor. The words were muffled at first, but soon they became clear, and with each word, Ethan felt the weight of the sea pressing down on his chest. He heard her say he was slipping, that he had left the stove on again, that he was too frail to live alone. He heard Victor agree, his tone cold, pragmatic, as if speaking of a broken chair or a failing engine. They spoke of nursing homes, of convenience, of safety, cloaked in the language of burden. Then they spoke of the house, of its value, of what it could bring them if sold. Numbers danced between them, numbers spoken with excitement, numbers that measured not just wood and stone, but years of sacrifice and love. Clara even laughed, a laugh that pierced Ethan deeper than any blade as she spoke of how easy it would be, how much they stood to gain. Ethan froze, his hand trembling as he clutched the receiver. He had weathered storms that split ships in half, had faced roaring winds and waves that threatened to drag him under, but nothing had prepared him for this. His daughter, his own flesh and blood, the child for whom he had worked himself to the bone, was plotting his removal, reducing him to an obstacle between her and the life she desired. Victor's voice joined hers, smooth and certain, pressing forward, urging haste, insisting that the sooner it was done, the easier it would be. They spoke as if Ethan were already gone, as if he were a ghost haunting a house that belonged to their future. The room seemed to close in on him. The tick of the clock on the wall grew louder, a relentless beat marking the shattering of trust. Margaret's photograph seemed to watch him from the mantel, her eyes filled, not with laughter now, but with something sterner, something warning. Ethan's knees felt weak as he sank back into the chair, his breath ragged. He let the phone slip from his grasp, the sound of it clattering against the wood floor, echoing through the silence. Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs with merciless rhythm, as if the sea itself mocked him for his blindness. The shadows in the house thickened, and in them Ethan saw the truth he had long denied. Clara had forgotten the lessons Margaret had tried to teach her. She had forgotten the nights of sacrifice, the mornings of struggle, the love that had built this home. She had forgotten gratitude, replacing it with greed. Victor had never seen Ethan as anything more than a stepping stone, a man whose generosity could be drained until nothing was left. And now together they had decided his time was over. Ethan sat in silence, his mind a storm. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath the pain something began to stir. It was not despair nor resignation. It was something harder, forged in the fires of years at sea, something that had carried him through storms and loss. His heart pounded, his hands clenched into fists, and slowly, very slowly, he began to see what must be done. They thought him weak, they thought him blind, they thought the tide was in their favor. But Ethan knew the sea better than anyone. He knew tides turned, he knew storms could be outlasted, and he knew one truth above all else. A man who builds with his own hands never forgets the strength it takes to tear down and rebuild again. He rose from his chair, his shadow stretching long across the floor. The house seemed to breathe with him, the old timbers groaning, the walls whispering secrets only he could hear. Margaret's voice seemed to echo faintly in his memory. Do not give so much that she forgets to be grateful. He had given, and Clara had forgotten. But now she would remember. The sea outside roared louder, as if urging him forward. Ethan turned from the window, his jaw set his path clear. This was only the beginning. The following morning broke gray and heavy, the sea swollen with mist that blurred the horizon. Ethan Ward stood at his kitchen window with a chipped mug of black coffee, staring out at the restless water. The waves rose and fell like the rhythm of a vast, breathing creature, each crash reminding him of the words he had overheard the night before. He had not slept. How could he? Every time he closed his eyes, Clara's laugh returned to him, sharp and cruel, the sound of a daughter who had traded her father's love for the promise of wealth. The words replayed endlessly, Victor's voice with its cold certainty, Clara's nervous agreement that grew bolder with every mention of the house. Their betrayal had not been a slip of the tongue, not a moment of thoughtless conversation. It was a plan carefully crafted, spoken aloud, as if his life were a puzzle piece they had already decided to discard. Ethan sipped his coffee, but it tasted bitter metallic. He set the mug down and pressed his weathered hands against the counter, feeling the grain of the wood beneath his fingertips. This counter, he remembered, was one he had built himself 20 years earlier when Margaret had wanted more space for baking. He had cut and sanded each board until it gleamed, proud of the work, proud of the home they had created together. And now his daughter wanted to sell it as if it were nothing more than a commodity, as if years of love and labor were just numbers on a ledger. He left the kitchen and moved through the house, his steps heavy but steady. Each room seemed to speak to him. In the hallway, the photographs of Clara as a child lined the walls. Clara on her first day of school, Clara holding a seashell larger than her head, Clara standing proudly with Margaret on the porch steps. In the living room, the old oak chest where Margaret had kept her knitting still rested near the window, the lid slightly warped from years of salt air. Upstairs, the bedroom smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets Margaret had placed in drawers long ago. Every corner of the house was alive with memory, but those memories now burned with betrayal. The discovery of Clara's true intentions was not merely painful, it was shattering. Ethan had lived his life believing family was sacred, that the sacrifices he had made for Clara would one day be remembered with gratitude. Instead, she had laughed at him behind his back, reduced him to a burden, a problem to be solved. It was as if all the storms he had survived at sea had gathered into one, crashing inside his chest with relentless force. By midday, Ethan could no longer sit still. He walked down to the shore, the sand damp and dark beneath his boots, the air thick with brine. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the sharp scent of the sea, and tried to steady his thoughts. He had always found clarity near the water. The ocean had taught him patience, resilience, the knowledge that even the fiercest storms eventually passed. But this storm, the storm inside him, would not pass unless he acted. He thought of Margaret again. She had always been the anchor in his life, guiding him with wisdom that seemed simple but cut to the heart of things. He remembered her words spoken one late night years ago, when they were worried about money for Clara's schooling. Do not give her so much that she forgets to be grateful. He had not listened. He had worked harder, given more, sacrificed everything. And now Clara had indeed forgotten. The ungratefulness had festered into greed, and Ethan was left holding the shards of a trust he had once thought unbreakable. That night, unable to bear the silence, Ethan opened the drawer in his study where he kept old papers. Folders stacked neatly, yellowing with age, carried the weight of his life's sacrifices. Tuition receipts for Clara's university, checks for her wedding, records of loans repaid, debts covered. Each slip of paper told the same story, a father who had given everything so his daughter could live well. As Ethan flipped through them, his chest tightened. How easily she had dismissed it all, how quickly she had turned his love into leverage for her own ambition. The more Ethan read, the clearer his path became. He was not powerless. The house was his, the legacy of his hands and his labor, and no one could take it from him without his consent. Clara and Victor might think him weak, confused, ready to be pushed aside, but they were wrong. Ethan had faced storms far worse than greedy children. He had built ships meant to endure the open sea. He could endure this too, and he could strike back in a way they would never expect. But for now, he said nothing. He moved through the days with quiet precision, masking the storm that raged within him. Clara called once more during the week, her voice bright and affectionate, asking if he was eating enough, reminding him again to take care. Ethan answered gently, hiding the bitterness, his tone steady. He let her think he was still the father who trusted her completely, still the old man who relied on her kindness. She would never know what he had heard, not until it was too late. Late one evening, Ethan stood once again by the window looking out at the sea. The lighthouse beam swept across the waves, cutting through the mist, a signal of safety for ships in the dark. He thought of it as a symbol for himself, a reminder that even in betrayal, even in heartbreak, he could still guide his own course. He was not adrift. He was not broken. He was a man with a plan forming quietly inside him, a plan that would change everything. As the days passed, that plan grew sharper, more certain. Ethan began to think not only of protecting himself, but of teaching Clara and Victor a lesson they would never forget. They had taken him for granted, reduced him to numbers and weakness, but soon they would see the truth. Soon they would discover just how strong a man could be when pushed too far. The house creaked around him as the wind picked up outside the sound like the groaning timbers of a ship at sea. Ethan closed his eyes and listened, feeling Margaret's presence in the rhythm of the storm. She had always trusted his instincts, had always believed in his strength. Now he would honor her memory not with despair but with action. He turned away from the window and walked slowly back to his chair. His heart pounded with new purpose, his mind no longer clouded with confusion but sharpened by betrayal. The discovery of Clara's plan had broken something inside him, but in the brokenness something else had been forged, something harder, colder, unyielding. The tide had turned and Ethan was ready, and yet he could not shake the unease that lingered in the air. Betrayal was not the end of his story. It was only the beginning. The worst of the storm had yet to come, and when it did, it would test not only his strength, but the very foundation of everything he had built. The storm did not arrive all at once. It began with whispers in the rafters, the sigh of wind pressing against the windows, and the long moan of waves grinding against the cliffs below. By the time midnight fell, the sea outside Hollow Pines was a black expanse, heaving and writhing like a living beast. Ethan Ward sat in his chair by the window, staring into the darkness as if it might stare back. He had faced many storms during his years as a shipbuilder, had known the way timbers strained under pressure, how bolts groaned when battered by wind and spray. But this storm was different. This storm was inside him. Every word he had overheard from Clara and Victor replayed with cruel clarity. He could still hear Clara's laugh light, but edged with greed still hear Victor's voice weighing his worth in dollars and convenience. They had stripped him of dignity in their minds long before they dared say the words aloud. To them, he was not a man anymore. He was a burden, a stepping stone, a house key standing between them and a fortune. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Ethan had known. He thought of the years he had labored for Clara, each sacrifice laid brick by brick into the foundation of her future. He remembered working double shifts in the shipyards, his hands raw and cracked from salt and steel, so that Clara could have the best education. He remembered selling his fishing boat, the vessel that had carried him through countless dawns, to pay for her wedding, when she insisted on the grand ceremony of her dreams. He remembered Margaret whispering late at night, "Ethan, do not give so much that she forgets to be grateful." But he had given anyway, believing love would plant gratitude in her heart. Now gratitude was gone, replaced by greed, by calculation, by betrayal. Ethan rose from his chair and began to pace the house. The floorboards creaked under his boots, familiar sounds that once comforted him but now seemed to echo like accusations. He moved through the living room where Clara had taken her first steps, the small indent still visible in the wood where her toy chest had rested for years. He paused in the kitchen where Margaret had baked bread, the scent of yeast and rosemary forever etched into his memory. Upstairs he lingered in Clara's old bedroom, still painted the soft blue she had chosen as a teenager. The walls were hung with photographs of school dances, letters from friends, drawings she had once proudly taped to the door. Each memory was a weight, pressing harder against his chest. The storm inside him grew stronger, swirling with grief, rage, and something else, something harder, something that refused to break. Ethan returned to his study and pulled out the old folders again. Paper after paper testified to his devotion. Tuition receipts, wedding bills, loans, co-signed debts forgiven. Each page was a chapter in the story of his sacrifices, each number proof of how much he had given, He laid them across the desk, one beside another, until the entire surface was covered. Under the dim lamplight, the papers glowed pale and merciless, a ledger of love unreturned. He sank into the chair, his hands gripping the arms until his knuckles whitened. Margaret's voice came back to him, not soft this time, but stern. Do not let them take advantage of you. Do not let them steal what we built. He closed his eyes and whispered into the silence. I should have listened, Maggie. I should have listened. The sea roared louder outside as if echoing his words. The house trembled with the force of the wind, and in that trembling Ethan felt something shift inside himself. He was not helpless. He was not the confused old man Clara and Victor imagined him to be. He was the man who had built this house with his own hands, plank by plank, nail by nail. He was the man who had raised Clara with patience and devotion. He was the man who had survived storms that would have drowned weaker souls. And now he was the man who would not allow betrayal to go unanswered. He rose from the desk and walked back to the window. The lighthouse beam cut through the mist, a steady pulse of light against the black horizon. It reminded him of the nights long ago when he and Margaret had walked the cliffs, their hands clasped, their voices mingling with the crash of waves. She had trusted him to protect their family, to guard what they had built. That promise had not ended with her death. Ethan pressed his hand against the cold glass, feeling the tremor of wind shudder through the window pane. His reflection stared back at him, lined and worn, but his eyes burned with new fire. Clara and Victor thought him weak. They thought he would yield, accept their plans, shuffle into the nursing home they had chosen while they sold the house and pocketed the profit. They thought he would fade quietly, grateful for the scraps of attention they offered. They were wrong. The storm outside raged with a violence that rattled the house, but inside Ethan grew calm. He knew storms. He knew how to endure them, how to bend without breaking, how to wait until the tide shifted. The rage inside him did not scatter his thoughts. It sharpened them, honed them like steel on a whetstone. He sat again in his chair by the window, Margaret's photograph on the mantel, watching him. The storm-howled lightning flashed across the sea, and in the flicker of light he saw her face more clearly than ever. Her eyes seemed to say, "Do not let them win. Do not give them what we built." Ethan nodded slowly. He would not. The hours passed, the storm outside finally easing into steady rain, but the storm within him remained unbroken. He could no longer deny the truth. Clara and Victor had betrayed him. They had reduced him to a burden. They had plotted to strip him of his home and his dignity, and now he would answer in kind. Yet Ethan did not rush. He knew better than to charge headlong into battle without a plan. The sea had taught him patience. The sea had taught him timing. He would wait, he would prepare, and when the moment came, he would act with precision. Clara and Victor would never see it coming. As dawn crept across the horizon, pale and cold, Ethan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The decision was made. The storm within him had found its shape. It was no longer a chaos of grief and anger. It was a force with direction, with purpose. The tide had turned, and when the next wave rose, it would not crash against him. It would crash against them. Ethan Ward woke the next morning with clarity in his chest, like the sharp air that follows a storm. The grief was still there, the betrayal still raw, but it had hardened into something colder. He moved through the house as though he were both master and stranger, seeing each room not with sentiment but with strategy. Where Clara saw a fortune, Ethan saw leverage. Where Victor saw weakness, Ethan saw the weapon of surprise. For most of his life, Ethan had been known as a man of steady hands and quiet endurance. But a man who builds ships understands that storms are not survived by endurance alone. They are survived by planning, foresight, and the ability to act decisively when the moment demands. Now Ethan would use those same instincts not to save vessels, but to save himself, and to ensure Clara and Victor learned the cost of betrayal. His first step was silence. Clara called again later that week, her voice as bright and false as polished glass. Ethan answered with warmth, keeping his words light, disguising the storm raging beneath. He let her believe he was the same father she had always known, grateful for her attention, blind to her schemes. Every gentle laugh, every softened reply was a mask he wore with purpose. If Clara sensed even a flicker of suspicion, she might change her plan, and Ethan needed her to stay confident until the trap was ready. When the call ended, Ethan reached for the small wooden box in his study, the one Margaret had insisted they keep after her first diagnosis. Inside, beneath old documents, was the business card of Harold Crane, a lawyer known not for grand offices or corporate clients, but for discretion. Ethan had not spoken to him in years, but Margaret had trusted him, and that was enough. The next morning, Ethan drove into Hollow Pines, the mist curling low over the streets, the smell of brine clinging to the air. He parked outside Harold's office, a modest brick building with weathered shutters, and stepped inside. The waiting room was lined with shelves of legal books and framed photographs of fishing boats clients Harold had helped over the years. It smelled faintly of coffee and dust, familiar in its simplicity. When Harold greeted him, he looked much the same as Ethan remembered, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, his handshake firm. "Ethan Ward," he said, his voice steady. "It's been a long time. I'm sorry about Margaret." Ethan nodded, his throat tightening. "Thank you. She trusted you. And now I need to trust you too." Harold listened carefully as Ethan spoke, his pen moving across a yellow pad with practiced efficiency. Ethan told him everything. The overheard conversation, Clara's plans, Victor's calculations, the betrayal that had cut him to the bone. He expected anger, perhaps disbelief, but Harold only shook his head slowly, his expression one of weary recognition. "I wish I could say I've never heard something like this before," Harold said, "but I have. More often than you'd think." "Legally," Ethan asked, leaning forward, "can they do anything? Can they force me into a home? Can they sell the house without me?" Harold's voice was calm, but his words carried steel. "No, Ethan. The house is yours. It was deeded solely to you when Margaret passed. Clara and Victor have no legal claim to it. They can pressure you, they can manipulate you, but they cannot take it. Unless you give them control, it belongs only to you." Relief swept through Ethan, followed by something sharper. For the first time since the betrayal, he felt the ground beneath his feet solid again. The house was his. The decision was his. And if Clara and Victor thought otherwise, they were about to learn how wrong they were. "What if I wanted to sell it?" Ethan asked slowly. Quietly. Quickly. Harold looked up, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Are you serious?" "I have never been more serious." Harold leaned back, considering. "The market is strong. Investors are hungry for properties on the coast. With the right agent, it could happen within days. But Ethan, this would be final. Once you sell, there's no going back." Ethan's voice was steady. "I know. I built this house with my hands, Harold. Every board, every nail. But if my daughter sees it as nothing more than a prize to be stolen, then I will take it out of her reach. I will decide what becomes of it, not her." Harold studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll draw up the documents. But you'll need an agent who knows how to move quickly. Someone who won't ask too many questions." That was how Ethan met Selina Knox. She arrived at his home the next afternoon, a sharp woman in her 40s with a confident stride and eyes that missed nothing. Her reputation was well known in Hollow Pines, deals closed fast, contracts, airtight clients satisfied. She stepped through Ethan's doorway, glanced around the room, and said simply, "You've kept this place in remarkable shape." Ethan felt a flicker of pride despite himself. "Built it myself, 25 years ago." Selina smiled, tapping a note into her tablet. "Then it's not just a house, it's a story. Buyers pay more for stories." For the next 2 hours she walked through the house, measuring, noting, admiring the craftsmanship. She asked questions about renovations, about history, about every detail that gave the home character. Ethan answered carefully, his voice steady, even as his heart twisted at the thought of leaving. But each answer also tightened his resolve. If Clara and Victor thought they would claim this place as their own, they were in for the surprise of their lives. By evening, Selina had prepared a plan. "We'll list at just under market value to attract quick offers," she explained. "I have investors who pay cash. They don't haggle, they don't delay. If we move now, I can have contracts in your hand within days. Do it, Ethan said without hesitation. When Selena left, the house felt different. For years it had been a shrine to memory, but now it was a stage for his secret war. Every photograph on the wall, every piece of furniture, every worn floorboard was part of a battleground Clara and Victor did not even know existed. Ethan walked slowly through the rooms, touching the wood, the walls, the windows, committing it all to memory. This was not surrender. This was strategy. But a plan was more than selling a house. It was about control, about outmaneuvering his betrayers. That night, Ethan sat at his desk and made a list. First, sell the house. Second, secure the money where Clara and Victor could never touch it. Third, prepare a message that would make them feel the weight of what they had done. He imagined their faces when they returned their keys, useless in the new locks, their dreams crumbling before their eyes. The thought steadied him. It gave him strength. Days blurred into nights as the plan unfolded. Selena delivered as promised, an investor group eager to pay cash contracts drawn up within 3 days, closing scheduled before Clara and Victor would even return from their retreat. Harold managed the legal side, ensuring every document was watertight. Ethan moved with precision, never rushing, never faltering. He was a man preparing for battle, every step deliberate, every detail sharpened. And yet even as he planned, he could not silence the ghosts. Margaret's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of promises of the life they had built together. He felt the ache of leaving, the sting of abandoning the rooms where Clara had grown, the porch where he and Margaret had watched the sunset. But then he remembered Clara's laugh, Victor's cold voice, the words that had stripped away all illusion. Betrayal had turned memory into fuel, and he would burn it if he had to. One evening, as the final papers waited for his signature, Ethan stood at the window again. The sea was calm now, the lighthouse beam sweeping steadily across the horizon. For the first time in weeks he felt peace, not the peace of surrender, but the peace of a man who had chosen his course. Clara and Victor thought they had outsmarted him. They thought his silence was weakness. They thought his love had blinded him. But love, when betrayed, becomes something far more dangerous. The tide had turned, and Ethan Ward was ready to unleash it. Ethan Ward rose before dawn and stood at the kitchen sink while the kettle hissed. The dark water beyond the cliff wore a skin of cold silver, and the lighthouse sent its patient beam across the horizon. He felt the night inside him settle into a sharper kind of quiet. The grief had not left. It had crystallized. There was work to do, and the work began with a plan no one would suspect. He took a notebook from the junk drawer, the small cloth-bound one Margaret used to keep grocery lists and garden notes. He turned to a clean page and wrote 3 short lines in a slow hand. Secure counsel. Control the sale. Protect the money. Then he set the pencil down and read the words again, the way a ship captain studies a map before a hard crossing. A plan was only as strong as the first step. The first step would be silence. Clara called at 9. He let her voice wash over him, warm and glassy. She asked if he had eaten, if he was sleeping well, if he had used the grocery app she had installed on his phone last winter. He told her he was fine. He told her he had plenty of food. He told her he was thinking of taking more walks. He did not tell her that he had heard everything. He did not tell her that he could hear Victor in the background, low and certain. He ended the call with the same words he had used since she was little. Take care of yourself. Then he set the phone down and let the quiet return. He drove into town after breakfast, with the steady caution of a man who understands that precision is its own kind of strength. The office of Harold Crane sat above a hardware store on Harbor Street, its brick and clapboard worn smooth by salt wind. Ethan climbed the narrow stairs and paused in the doorway. A bell jingled. Harold stood from behind a desk covered in neat stacks of paper. Ethan Ward, said Harold with a small smile. It has been a while. It has, Ethan said. Thank you for seeing me on short notice. There was no need to speak in circles. Ethan took the chair across from Harold and told him what had happened. He kept his voice measured as he described the open line, the words. He never should have heard the numbers spoken like a tide chart. He did not rage, and he did not weep. He laid out the facts the way an engineer sets tools in a row. Harold listened without interruption. When Ethan finished, the lawyer folded his hands and looked down for a long moment as if weighing the room. Then he asked 3 questions in the careful manner of a man who has learned that clarity prevents pain. Is the deed in your name alone? Do you have a current will? Have you given your daughter any legal authority over your affairs? Yes. Yes. No. Harold nodded. Then you are not as vulnerable as they think you are. The house is yours. No one can sell it without your consent. No one can place you anywhere without your consent. If anyone tries to use pressure or deceit, I will handle it. But I do not think they will try, if they do not know you are moving. What do you want to do? Ethan felt the calmness of true ground return to his feet. I want to sell it quickly and quietly, he said. Before they return, I want cash, and I want to move the money where they cannot find it or touch it. That can be done, said Harold. There are investors who will pay cash for a coastal property in good repair. If you are ready, I will contact an agent who can move at speed and with discretion. I am ready, Ethan said. He signed a narrow stack of engagement papers, simple and direct. Harold made 2 calls as Ethan watched the gray light through the window brighten toward noon. When the lawyer hung up, he tapped his pen once against the pad. Selina Knox will come to the house tomorrow afternoon, he said. She understands what is required. She will bring her photographer. She will bring her buyers if she believes the price and condition meet. If you choose to proceed, we will have contracts within days. Ethan thanked him and stepped back into the street. The gulls were loud over the harbor, their voices sharp and hungry. He stood a moment with his hands in his coat pockets and let the wind strip the last of the night from his face. Then he drove home along the bluff road, the sea to his left like a living page he could finally read again. That afternoon he prepared the house as if a careful guest were coming to take stock. He polished the plank table in the kitchen until the grain rose like rivers of honey. He opened the curtains in the sitting room and let the northern light find the old oak chest where Margaret once kept her knitting. He carried a box of worn boots to the shed and swept sand from the back hall. He did not hide the life of the house. He set it in order. Craft invites respect, Margaret used to say. Let the work speak for itself. He slept without dreams and woke before the alarm. The morning carried that pearly light common to the coast when weather is thinking of changing its mind. He made coffee and stood at the bay window with the mug warming his palms. When Selina Knox arrived at 2, she stepped through the door with the alert posture of a woman who knows both speed and care. You must be Mr. Ward, she said. Thank you for having me. Ethan nodded and stepped aside so she could see the sweep of the sitting room. Selina moved through the house with swift attention. Not hurried, focused. She asked short questions and listened to short answers. When were the windows last replaced? What is behind that panel? How old is the roof? Did you install the kitchen counter yourself? Ethan felt a narrow pride steady his breath as he pointed out Mortis's braces and the hidden work of the stairwell. He did not apologize for the scuffs on the threshold. A house near the sea learns to carry marks with grace. Selina paused often to type notes and take photographs. At the end of the tour, she stood by the front window and looked out across the cliff line toward the dark run of pines. Here is what I think, she said. We list at a figure that invites a cash offer but does not understate the value of the workmanship. We make the photographs live today. I contact 3 buyers who will pay without delay. We request proof of funds with the offer. We set a closing within 10 business days. We protect your right to remain for 30 days after closing if you choose. Does that meet your needs? Yes, Ethan said. He felt the clean click of something fitting at last. It meets them exactly. Selina nodded once. Then let us begin. By nightfall the photographs were live. They showed the beams and the burnish of the floors and the deep window seat that looked out over the winter sea. They showed the stairs and the handrail and the small workroom where Margaret once pressed flowers between pages of an old atlas. They did not show Ethan. They did not show the photograph of Margaret on the mantel. They showed a structure built by hands that had loved the making. Before he went to bed, Ethan took out his notebook again. He drew a small box beside the first line and marked it with an X. Secure counsel. Then he drew a box beside the second line and left it empty. Control the sale. The empty square gave him a strange comfort. Progress and patience could live on the same page. The first offer came before noon the next day. Selina called from the road. Cash buyer. Proof of funds attached. Inspection limited to major systems only. 10 business days to close. She named a figure that sat cleanly within the space Harold had predicted. Ethan asked one question. Can they move faster if required? Selina said yes. Ethan said, then let us accept. He stood at the window, after the call ended, and watched a single fishing boat ease beyond the point. The boat turned its bow toward open water and held steady. He recognized the choice in the gesture. That afternoon he met Harold and Selina at the title office on the far side of town. The building was new and square, and the conference room carried the faint lemon smell of fresh paint. Contracts were stacked in neat piles. The title officer wore a patient smile and spoke in a voice designed to keep nerves from breaking. Ethan read every page. He took his time, and when he asked a question, Harold pointed to the clause and translated it into plain speech. When Ethan signed, he did it with a steady hand. You will have a wire confirmation on closing, said the title officer. Funds will post the same day. Harold slid a thin folder across the table. I also recommend we move your accounts, he said. We will set up a private banking relationship. New numbers, new credentials. We will take custody of the paper trail until everything settles. If anyone seeks to pry, they will find nothing useful. Thank you, Ethan said. He left the office with the soft weight of relief inside his ribs. The relief was not joy. It was not triumph. It was the feeling of a keel finding water after a long scrape of rock. The vessel had room to move again. He drove home in a gray dusk and parked in the gravel. Before he went inside, he stood a moment with the engine ticking and the wind sowing threads through the pines. The house looked both nearer and farther than it had that morning. The following day he visited a bank Harold had recommended. The branch manager walked him through accounts that carried layers of security and personal attention. She spoke with respect not because of the number on the form, but because she understood that some deposits carry the weight of a life. By noon, Ethan had new credentials and a promise of discreet handling. When he stepped back into the winter light, the air smelled faintly of copper and tide. He placed his hand on the low stone wall outside the bank and felt its chill. He did not go home at once. He drove along the marsh road to the edge of the reserve and parked near a line of bare birches. The land here lay flat and open with water threading like veins through the reeds. On the far side stood a small cluster of cottages raised a little above the floodplain. They were simple and sound, with roofs that had learned to bear the weight of wet wind. He knew the property manager by sight. They had exchanged small talk for years at the hardware store. He walked to the office and asked if any cottages might be available for a short lease. As a matter of fact, she said, we do have one. It is simple but warm. It is quiet and close to the path along the marsh. Would that suit you? It would, Ethan said. He toured the cottage. It held a single bedroom, a front room with a small wood stove, and a kitchen with a square window that framed a stretch of water where herons liked to stand. The place felt honest. It did not pretend to be more than it was. He signed a 3-month lease and arranged to have the utilities placed in his name. When he stepped outside, he realized the lighthouse beam, though distant, reached even here at night. The thought steadied him. He returned to his house on the cliff and packed 2 boxes as a test. He packed not the furniture, not the rugs, not the trinkets picked up over years. He packed the essentials of a life that wished to move lightly. He placed Margaret's recipe book on top and closed the lid with both hands. He labeled the box with a single word, keep. He set it by the door and did not let himself look at it again. The sale moved with clean speed. Inspectors came and left with polite nods. An appraiser measured, though the buyers did not need the number to borrow a cent. Selina kept Ethan informed with brief calls that landed like steady drumbeats. Harold sent him documents to review and sign. Every page closed a loop that had once been loose. Clara called twice during those days. Her voice was all concern and questions. He gave her nothing to find. He asked about her drive. He asked about the weather where she was. He told her the gulls had been busy, and the neighbor's cat had found a warm spot beneath the porch. When she said they would be back the following Friday, he said that would be nice. When she said they had a surprise for him, he said he was sure he would like it. When the call ended, he placed his phone on the shelf and turned the sound off. On the morning of the closing, the sky was a bright, cold blue that made the sea look darker than it was. Ethan wore the navy suit Margaret had chosen for Clara's graduation. At the title office, he signed the final set of documents and watched the settlement sheet print from a machine that hummed like a distant engine. The title officer checked the routing numbers and placed a call. A moment later, she handed Ethan a single page that confirmed what the screen already showed. The wire had landed. The sale was done. When he stepped outside, he did not go straight to his truck. He stood for a minute on the sidewalk and let the thin winter sun touch his face. The house on the cliff was no longer his. The knowledge did not crush him. It lifted, it widened the air. He drove back to the cliff road for one last walk through the rooms that had carried his life this far. He did not linger. He touched the stair rail, the window seat, the kitchen counter he had shaped by hand. He paused in the bedroom and rested his palm on the bedpost. He whispered a thank you to Margaret without speaking the words out loud. Then he locked the door and stood with the key in his hand until the wind pushed against his back like an old friend urging him forward. He returned to the Marsh cottage just before the light went gray. He set his 2 boxes in the front room and placed Margaret's photograph on the small mantel above the stove. He made tea and carried the mug to the door. The air smelled of peat and salt. Somewhere in the distance, a single bell buoy rang with the slow patience of water learning the shape of night. He opened his notebook and drew an X in the second box. Control the sale. Then he looked at the third line and let the tip of the pencil rest there. Protect the money. That step had begun and more remained. Steps within steps. He could feel the shape of it now, not only as safety but as message. Not only as defense but as reply. He closed the notebook and listened. The marsh was quiet. The tide was turning. On the table beside the notebook lay an unopened parcel that had arrived at the cottage that afternoon. Small, plain brown. No one knew it was there. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then he reached for the lamp and turned the light down low. He was ready to move from planning to the part that leaves a mark. And in the dark pane of the window, the lighthouse beam swept and returned, as if to say that timing matters and that the next move must be made with care. The Marsh cottage had settled into Ethan's bones after only a few days. It was smaller, humbler, but its quiet suited him. The stove's steady crackle, the view of reeds bowing in the wind, the faint cry of herons at dawn, it all felt like a kind of camouflage. From here he could act unseen, while Clara and Victor believed he was still in his house on the cliff waiting passively for their return. He moved with care, not rushing, because a man's disguise is strongest when it grows from truth. To them he was still their grateful old father. To himself he was the storm that waited just offshore. His first step had been the sale. The money was secure now, tucked away behind layers of accounts and protections that Harold and the bank manager had built for him. Clara and Victor would never touch a cent, but Ethan wanted more than security. He wanted them to feel the sting of betrayal themselves. He wanted them to discover what it meant to trust someone blindly, only to find the ground vanish beneath their feet. So he began to weave the threads of his plan. He visited the cliff house while the new owners prepared their own move-in. His 30 days of access were intact, written in neat black ink on the closing documents, and he used that time to arrange what he needed. He parked in the garage to avoid curious eyes and carried in a small parcel from the Marsh cottage. Inside was the device he had ordered in secret, a camera, no larger than a thumb hidden in the shell of a phone charger. He tested it in the cottage first, watching the feed appear on his phone, crisp and sharp, every whisper of sound captured. It was the kind of tool that gave him distance and control. With it he could be absent and present at once. He chose his placement carefully, by the front door angled just so it would capture the moment Clara and Victor arrived. The device glowed once when he plugged it in, then went dark silent as a hunter waiting in tall grass. Ethan checked the app on his phone. The entryway filled the screen perfectly. He adjusted once, tested twice, then nodded to himself. The stage was set, but a stage without words is only half a performance. Ethan needed something to deliver the truth in his own voice, something that could not be denied or twisted. So he sat at the small desk in the Marsh cottage one night, the lamplight falling across a stack of paper. His hand trembled at first as he wrote, but soon the rhythm returned steady and precise the way it had when he drew up ship plans decades ago. He wrote to Clara and Victor with the calm authority of a man who had weighed every word. He told them he had overheard their plans, that he knew of their betrayal, that he had sold the house and taken the money. He reminded them of the sacrifices he had made, of the years they had forgotten. He told them he had moved on, that they had no power over him, that the life they had imagined had crumbled in their own hands. He signed it simply with the word they no longer deserved to use, with ease, Dad. He folded the letter and sealed it in a white envelope. On the front, in careful script, he wrote both their names. He would leave it where they could not miss it, taped at eye level inside the front door. When they stepped inside, expecting comfort, they would find only the weight of his truth. There was still the matter of their belongings. Ethan had no desire to see their clothes or papers strewn through the house when the new owners arrived. More than that, he wanted to deny Clara and Victor even the illusion of belonging to the place. So he contacted a moving company in town, arranging for everything they had left in the house to be packed and stored. He paid in cash, leaving no record that would lead back to him. By the time Clara and Victor returned, their possessions would be sitting in a warehouse on the edge of Hollow Pines, labeled neatly with their names, waiting for fees to mount if they failed to collect them. Each detail clicked into place as methodical as laying the keel of a ship. He checked the camera twice a day, ensuring the feed remained clear. He rehearsed in his mind the expression that would pass across Clara's face when her key failed to turn. He imagined Victor's frustration when the garage door refused to open. He pictured them reading his letter, the silence stretching between them, as the words stripped away the future they had counted on. But Ethan did not allow himself to grow careless. Disguise required patience. Clara called again, midweek, her voice honeyed with affection. He answered with warmth, spoke of gulls and weather, asked about her meetings. She told him they would be home by Friday evening. Ethan smiled into the phone and told her he would be waiting. When the call ended, he looked around the Marsh cottage, the small stove glowing, the boxes stacked neatly by the wall. Waiting, yes, but not in the way she imagined. The final day arrived with skies heavy and low. Ethan drove once more to the cliff house, the new locks cold in his hand as he stepped inside. He carried the envelope and pressed a strip of tape across its back, fixing it firmly to the front door at eye level. He stepped back and studied it. White against wood, it stood out like a lighthouse beam in the dark. There would be no missing it. He checked the camera feed one last time from his phone. The angle was perfect. The door, the note, the space where Clara and Victor would stand, it was all framed as if the house itself wished to bear witness. He whispered into the stillness, "It is ready." Then he locked the door, and left by the garage, the new keys biting into his palm. Back at the Marsh cottage, he brewed a cup of tea, and sat by the window with his phone beside him. The reeds shifted in the wind, the marsh birds calling across the water. Inside, his heart beat steady and strong. For the first time in years, he felt not like a man waiting to be managed, but like a man holding the tiller of his own life. Evening approached, and with it came a sharpening of the air. The phone on the table buzzed once, then again the alert of motion detected. Ethan leaned forward, his breath catching. On the screen, he saw the black SUV pull into the driveway. He saw Clara step out first, stretching her arms, her expression relaxed with the comfort of expectation. He saw Victor close his door, the luggage handles shining in the last light of day. Ethan tightened his grip on the phone, his eyes fixed on the feed. The trap was sprung. The betrayal was about to reveal itself. Not his, but theirs, not hidden, but plain as the letter taped to the door, and he would watch every moment of it unfold. The marsh air had gone still by the time Ethan's phone buzzed again. He set his tea aside, hands steady as he pulled the device closer. The small camera's feed filled the screen. The black SUV gleamed under the weak light, its engine ticking as it cooled. Clara stepped out, first brushing her hair from her face, her lips curving into the easy smile of someone who believed the world was hers. Victor followed, dragging 2 suitcases, his stride purposeful, his eyes already on the house as if it were a prize waiting to be claimed. Ethan leaned forward, every sense sharpened. His pulse beat in his ears, but his hands did not tremble. He had lived for this moment, had built toward it with the same patience and precision he once used when laying a ship's keel. This was not vengeance in a fit of rage. This was calculation. This was justice. Clara reached the front door first. She slipped her hand into her purse, pulled out the familiar brass key, and pushed it into the lock. For a moment she seemed puzzled. She turned the key once, then again. The lock refused. A small frown gathered between her brows. She tried harder, jiggling the key, her voice muffled but sharp through the speaker. That's odd. The lock must be stuck. Victor set down the suitcases and stepped closer. Let me try. He took the key from her and twisted it, his face hardening as the lock resisted him. He pressed his shoulder against the door, tried again, then stepped back with a curse. These aren't old locks. They've been changed. Clara blinked, confusion chasing across her face. Changed? Why would Dad? She stopped, her voice faltering, the first thread of unease pulling tight. Victor's eyes darted to the garage. He pressed the remote clip to his keychain. Nothing happened. He pressed again, his jaw tightening. Dead. It's been disconnected. He turned, moving quickly around the side of the house. For 3 long minutes the camera showed only Clara still at the door, still trying her useless key. When Victor returned, his face was pale with controlled anger. Back doors the same. Every lock's been replaced. The silence between them was heavy. Ethan could almost hear it through the feed, a silence thick with dawning dread. Clara pulled out her phone, her hands trembling now. I'll call him. Maybe there's been a mistake. She dialed quickly, pressed the phone to her ear. Ethan watched, knowing the call would never reach him. The number had been severed days ago. Her lips parted in disbelief as the call rang endlessly, then ended without even the dignity of a voicemail. He isn't answering, she whispered. Victor's voice came low and cold. Something's wrong. He wouldn't do this unless he broke off his gaze, snapping to the door. Look, the camera caught it perfectly. Clara leaned forward, eyes widening as she saw the envelope taped at eye level. Her name, Victor's name, written in Ethan's careful hand. Her fingers shook as she tore it free, the seal breaking with a sound that carried clearly through the speaker. Ethan held his breath. Clara unfolded the paper and her eyes swept across the words. The color drained from her face. She staggered back a step, pressing the letter to her chest as if the words themselves burned. Victor snatched it from her hands, his eyes racing along the lines. His jaw clenched. His lips pulled back in something between a snarl and a grimace. He sold it, he said, his voice a harsh whisper. He sold the house. 890,000. Cash. It's gone. Clara shook her head violently. No, that can't be true. He wouldn't, he couldn't, but her voice faltered again, breaking under the weight of the words she had read. Ethan had written with finality, with precision, and there was no mistaking the truth. He had sold the house. He had taken the money. He had moved on, leaving them with nothing but the consequences of their greed. Victor crushed the paper in his fist, his composure unraveling. The old man played us. He heard everything. He broke off, his eyes flashing with anger. He outsmarted us. Clara pressed her hands to her face, tears streaking her carefully applied makeup. What are we going to do? Our lease is up next week. We told them we'd be moving here. We have nowhere to go. Victor's laugh was short and bitter. Nowhere. Try nothing. We have no savings, no house, no inheritance. And thanks to you, he jabbed a finger toward her. Thanks to your father, we have no safety net. My father, Clara, snapped, her voice cracking with fury. You were the one who said he was a burden. You were the one who pushed for the nursing home. I trusted you, Victor's face twisted. Trusted me. You were the one who laughed about him, called him helpless, treated him like a problem to be solved. Don't lay this at my feet. Their voices rose sharp and cutting, echoing through the empty entryway. Ethan listened from miles away, the feed carrying every word, every accusation. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He only watched the quiet satisfaction in his chest, steady as the tide. They were unraveling in the very house they had sought to steal, tearing each other apart over the ruins of their own scheme. Clara sank onto the suitcase, her body shaking with sobs. How could he do this to us? He's my father. He was supposed to. He was supposed to love me. Victor stared at her, his face hardened into something cruel. He did love you. That's why you thought you could take everything from him. But you underestimated him. We both did. The words hung in the air, bitter as seawater. Ethan sat back in his chair at the Marsh cottage, the phone heavy in his hand. He had seen enough. The letter had done its work. The locks had sealed the truth. Clara and Victor now understood that the man they had dismissed as weak had seen through them, had turned their betrayal into their own downfall. He powered off the feed, the screen going dark. In the silence, the crackle of the stove filled the room warm and steady. He poured himself a glass of wine, one Margaret had saved for a celebration that never came, and raised it toward her photograph on the mantel. To you, Maggie, he murmured. Justice served. The marsh outside lay still, but within Ethan a new current stirred. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of something larger, something freer. For the first time since Margaret's death, he felt not bound to the past, not chained by grief or by the expectations of others. He felt the clean, open horizon of a man who had seized back his life. And yet beneath that calm, a question pulsed like an undertow. What came next? Clara and Victor were desperate, now cornered. Desperate people made dangerous choices. He had won the first battle, but the war between father and daughter was far from over. Ethan set the glass down and opened his notebook. 2 boxes had been marked with an X. One remained. Protect the money. He tapped the page with the tip of his pencil and whispered into the quiet, the tide has turned, but it hasn't finished. The wind rose again over the marsh, rattling the reeds, carrying the faint sound of the sea. Ethan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He was not done. Not yet. The marshland lay hushed beneath a silver sky, as Ethan Ward prepared for what came next. The wineglass sat empty on the small table, Margaret's photograph gleaming faintly in the lamplight. Clara and Victor had discovered the truth, but Ethan knew the storm was not over. Betrayal left wounds, and wounded people could thrash with desperation. He had seen enough of the sea to know that calm waters could hide dangerous currents. The camera lay dark on his desk, now switched off. He had no need to watch further. He had seen their faces when the note burned through their illusions, seen the unraveling of their partnership as blame passed between them like a torch that scorched both hands. Still, Ethan kept the phone close. He expected the call would come not to the landline that no longer existed, but to the new number Harold had given him. A number they did not know. A number they would never have. The following morning dawned bright and bitter. Frost rimed the reeds outside his cottage, and the marsh birds rose in startled flocks when the first car passed on the road. Ethan brewed coffee and sat with his notebook open. 2 boxes already marked. One line remained. Protect the money. The bank account was secure, but protection meant more than locks and signatures. Protection meant freedom, the ability to live on his own terms. He thought of Margaret again, her voice urging him not to give away so much that gratitude died in the giving. He thought of Clara's laugh, that sharp edge of calculation. For years he had lived for others. Now he would live for himself, not with bitterness, but with the clear strength of a man who had survived betrayal and refused to be defined by it. By midday, the call came as he expected. A number he did not recognize flashed across the screen. He let it ring until it fell silent. Then another came and another. He set the phone face down and let them pass. By evening, the messages began to arrive at Harold's office instead, pleading first, then anger, then silence. Harold called to reassure him. "They have no claim, Ethan. They cannot touch you. Their words are nothing but wind." That night, Ethan sat by the stove and allowed himself to breathe. The house on the cliff was gone. The memories lived inside him where no one could sell them, no one could twist them into profit. He had money enough now to choose his path. The marsh cottage was quiet, honest, and it might serve for a season. But beyond the marsh lay the open coast, the world he had once known from the deck of his own small fishing boat. He felt something stir in him, not vengeance now, but anticipation. The next morning he drove down to the harbor where the boats rocked against their moorings. Men and women moved along the docks, repairing nets, hauling crates, calling greetings across the water. The smell of salt and tar wrapped around him, familiar as an old coat. He walked past the boats until he found what he was looking for. A modest vessel, sturdy, and weathered its hull sound, its mast proud. The owner, a man younger than Ethan, nodded politely. "Thinking of selling?" Ethan asked. The man studied him, then shrugged. "Perhaps." By the end of the day, the deal was struck. The boat would be Ethan's within the week. He would not fish for a living anymore, but he would sail again, feel the wind press against his face, feel the deck steady beneath his boots. The sea had been his companion long before Clara was born, and it would be his companion again. On Friday, word reached him that Clara and Victor had left Hollow Pines in the night. A neighbor at the Cliff House told Harold they had driven away in silence, their suitcases hastily packed. They had not returned for their belongings at the storage warehouse. Perhaps they would in time, but Ethan doubted it. Pride could be heavier than stone. Shame heavier still. Ethan felt no triumph when he heard the news. Only release. The fight was over, the bond severed. He bore no hatred for his daughter, only sorrow for what she had become. Perhaps one day she would remember, perhaps not. That was no longer his burden to carry. As the sun fell across the marsh that evening, Ethan carried a chair outside his cottage and watched the sky blaze with fire. He thought of Margaret beside him, her hand warm in his, her laughter soft in his ear. He raised a glass once more to her memory. "It is done, Maggie," he whispered. "We built something strong, and they could not take it from us." Not truly, not ever. The lighthouse beam swept across the horizon. Ethan closed his eyes and let the sea wind brush his face. For the first time in years he felt whole. Not a man abandoned, not a man betrayed, but a man who had claimed his freedom. The tide had turned, and it carried him forward into waters uncharted but his own. This story is about betrayal, but more importantly, it is about strength. It shows that even when trust is broken by those we love most, we are never powerless. We can choose to protect ourselves, to rise again, and to take back control of our lives. Ethan's journey is a reminder that dignity cannot be stolen, and sacrifice means nothing if it leaves us forgotten. In the end, he did not just protect his home. He protected his identity, his freedom, and his future. If this story moved, you please take a moment to like the video, share it with friends, and tell us your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this one to life.